Welcome again. Welcome back to the second part of our program, and you with the Galaxy Equalizers. And this morning, we're very fortunate to have the leader of the opposition, Miss Emmalin Pierre, would be joining us readily. She'll be joining us on the program, and we have a conversation with her. And here we have with us Master Carl, and I and the leader of the opposition would have a discussion, and you are free to ask questions, or you can ask a question through your post, or you can call in. Remember, the number to call is 536-2558. We believe that political leaders, we must know about them. We have to avoid snake in the grass. Maurice Bishop was a snake in the grass. He deceived the business people, the remnant of the plantocracy, the proletariats. Maurice Bishop tricked them and deceived them. And people didn't know him because he was such a good orator. This present leader is a fake. So we have a new leader in NNP after a very successful sojourn by Dr. Kit Mitchell. Dr. Kit Mitchell is the most successful political leader in Grenada and the Commonwealth. And he's a very tolerant and inclusive person too. Why do I say that? You know, under his watch, we liberalized telecommunication network. He always prepared to engage those who strongly oppose him. And every opportunity he got, he was prepared to work with them. And Doc never forget the people in the lower income group. He is definitely the most successful political leader in Grenada. In fact, the two most successful political leaders is Eric Gary and Kit Mitchell. And two of them was not of the status quo per se. Emmalin Pierre from Brush Grove, St. Andrews, one of the first women in Grenada who are likely to turn the prime minister. She's been in politics for over 20 years. Because of her role, because of what she did, because of her action, she catch the politician eye. And they was able to woo her to join in her involvement in youth, that was challenged. So we believe the way for her in politics may be very good, particularly if she follow the footsteps of Dr. Kit Mitchell. And in her corner, we will have three individuals I consider the wolves in Grenada politics: Kit Mitchell, Gregory Bowen, and Roland Bola. They are the envy of the opponents, the government. Sometimes I have a term in politics I call sometimes the success of Dr. Mitchell has caused the opposition to practically get mad. Envious admiration. She back with us now? Welcome, sister. You will hear me calling you sister and daughter and sister and leader of the opposition, and Miss Emmalin Pierre. Welcome to our program.
Thank you for having me, and good morning to all of your viewers, your listeners who are out there.
This is the first, and we hope it's not the last. Politicians must definitely interact with us, even if we're from rural Grenada and we're small. We want you to continue to interact with us on any issue. So you could call us anytime you want to join on the program. You should be free to call us. If you feel at any time you want to just call the program as an ordinary caller, you're free to do it. And anytime you want to have a program with us, you're welcome.
Thank you so much for that generous invitation. Thank you.
Ma'am, this morning we want to have a conversation with you But that might be putting it a little one side. We want to ask you a lot of questions. Because you are the new leader of the opposition, there are a lot of things we know about you, but there are a lot of issues we still want to know. We believe that we must know our leaders. We must know the philosophy, what they stand for, the policy. So we must able to predict their moves in the future. So I'm starting by asking you the first question I'm asking you. I know you are married and then you have children. You're in politics a long time, so I know a lot about you. So the first question I'm asking you now, madam, I have a lot of challenges with our young people, practically young men and young women. Would you encourage young people to get married? Or shack up?
Let me say this, and it's interesting that you ask it in that way. I got married when I was 19 years old. The question is, would I encourage every 19-year-old to get married? And the answer to that is no. I would not encourage every 19-year-old to get married. Marriage is a very serious thing. It requires major commitments, and so someone would need to be very certain that they are prepared to get into marriage. I'm very concerned about the high rate of divorce. And so it is something that you have to be prepared for. I am one of those persons who've had a very successful marriage, even if getting married very young. But we've seen a lot of young people getting into marriage early and not lasting very long. And we have to have the support system. Do I support marriage as against to shacking up, as you asked directly? The answer is certainly yes. I support marriage, and I just want to stress the point. Our society needs to provide far more support as it relates to young married couples. Whether, I remember attending a seminar once that had a theme that says, a wedding is for a day, but a marriage is for a lifetime. How do we help people to get married and to stay married? The support systems that are in place for that, because sometimes people get divorced for very trivial reasons. People just get tired of each other and they just decide they want to try something new. And I think that has a lot to do with the lack of support system and guidance. We counsel people for marriage in a week, 2 weeks, 3 months, maybe for the most. And after that, we leave them to fend on their own and to figure it out on their own. I believe in marriage, very much so, but I believe we need to provide far more support for especially young marriages.
If you had to, and I'm certain the time might come, sometimes men shy away from that. But if you were speaking to a group of young people, men and women, and somebody asks you what is the benefits of marriage, what would you say?
So, in terms of benefits of marriage, I believe, as I said before, two people in love, if you can love me so much, if you can have children with me, I should be worth getting married to, settling down and family. Children need a stable environment. I believe, first of all, children, when you get into having children, we encourage people, settle down in one family, put your eggs in one basket. I mean, people have their personal choices, and let me make that clear. You can make this into law, as in a case where if a person chooses to do otherwise, they go to prison, for example. That's a man's choice, a woman's choice. But if I have to encourage young persons, I would say find somebody who love and care for you, somebody who is stable and want to settle down, have a family, take care of a family, put their resources directly towards that family. People who have lived otherwise and are living that way, I would still encourage them. But of course, a person has their individual choice of how they want to live their life.
I have serious difficulties with the level of investment that we take. We seem to want to work for money and not money to work for us. At what age you believe parents should start discussion with their children about investment and money management?
I think it's something not just for parents. Parents and the school system or education system needs to be revamped in a way that we promote and encourage those kind of discussions, but not just discussions. I remember one of my sons at one point, I was Minister for Education at the time, and he took me to task because he couldn't understand a rule in school that you cannot sell. you know, and he said to me, Mommy, well, what's the point of teaching business in school if we're not going to get the practical experience? So if we go direct to the question, I would say as early as 5 years, once that child begins to understand that this is $5, this is a dollar, this is, 25 cents, we need to start teaching them the basic principles of saving, for example. Gone are the days when persons, every parent, not persons, every parent would have a little piggy bank that you encourage a child to drop 25 cents in, drop $1 in. I believe children are not too young to learn those things. The School Savings Union is another excellent example of how we can teach children to save and to manage what they have. But also, how do you get them to account? You had $50 for the week or $20 for the week. What did you choose to buy? Could you have bought this instead? What was the benefit of buying something else? It's very important because you take a survey of most adults, young adults, and you ask them, what's one of your biggest challenges? And I'm sure one of them you're going to get is financial management. That I get a paycheck at the end of the day for $1,200, but when I get to halfway in the month, I find it difficult to pay the bus, right? While, yes, the cost of living is an issue, a major issue, a top issue, but we also have persons who struggle. And especially we're seeing it now with the bi monthly payment, for example, where persons say, I prefer that I get this at the end of the month and I manage it properly. So I believe something as simple as the bi monthly payment should have come with some measure of additional support and education for people who, are so used to managing what they have at the end of the month as opposed to having half of it in the middle of the month. You might be very surprised some of the stories that you hear at the end of the month. People who get whatever small they get at the middle, how do they manage that? So children ought to have that conversation as early as possible. And as parents, as people in the community, we need to help them to have that conversation as early as possible.
If I was in Cuba, I might have
Mhm.
been in jail. If I was in Russia, definitely they'd send me in Siberia. If I was in North Korea, I would have been a dead man. Ma'am, are you a strong advocate of freedom of speech? And would you continue to advocate and to make certain Grenada have a free press?
Certainly, definitely. Freedom of speech is not just something that people would like to have or people think it's a great idea. This is our constitutional right. And the fact that it's enshrined in our constitution speaks to how important and how critical this is. And so, absolutely, I believe in freedom of speech. People must have a right to express themselves, people must have a right to express their views on critical issues. Sadly, when you look at what is happening in our society, I see more and more. We see signals that says that, particularly as it relates to the ruling administration and supporters of the ruling administration, that people ought not to express their views once it's contrary to that of the administration. And I think this is a dangerous road. Many people lost their lives for this, which is why we've inherited it. Many people would have fought for freedom of speech. There was a time when people did not have that right. And so the fact that we have it, we have to preserve and protect that right. And one of the things that's not good for society is that there seems to be a difference in views among many dependent on the organization that holds political power. So for example, basic example, you listen to a particular individual when the new national party is in government and they promote freedom of speech. Another administration, the NDC is in power, and you hear that same individual speak so differently about a person's expressing their constitutional right. We got to be consistent about this. We ought to understand the value of this. And freedom of the press is no different. I served as Minister for Information before, and our administration definitely, absolutely recognize freedom of the press. I think
You
all
are,
of these contribute to a very healthy society. And one of the things I would just stick in there is that when we express our views, when we have a free press, we got to make sure that there are some underlying factors. For example, truth, right? A free press doesn't mean just making up stories and broadcasting or printing. We want to make sure there's freedom, but that freedom is hinged on fairness, on truth, on facts, And the same thing as it relates to freedom of speech. When we speak freely, we want to bear in mind that it's not just our right to speak freely, but we want to make sure that we are responsible in expressing our views. So we want to fact check things. You don't just go there and say one and one is two, but you want to make sure that you've checked that and you're certain that one and one is two. Or you make sure that you explain that this is a view that may not necessarily be accurate when we got to be responsible using that freedom that we have. We want to be also very mindful that we might be wrong sometimes, we might be right sometimes, and we ought to respect the views of others. So we cannot just expect freedom of speech to apply to us personally, but don't think it should obtain for other people. We must be fair in ensuring that we have a society where every single person, regardless of their religious views, regardless of the political views, that this is across the board, fair and open to everyone to access.
we seem to have an increase in violence crime in Grenada, and not only in Grenada, throughout the Caribbean. Jamaica been having some police states under state of emergency. Recently in Trinidad, they had some state of emergency. Talk about violence crime in Grenada and what should be our approach to address it.
Obviously, there's been an increase in violent crime in our society, and it's something that we have to be very, very strategic about. We cannot just be talking about this, and we can't get emotional about it. So I remember listening to the Prime Minister speaking on this subject when asked, and he made 2 points that concern me. One referring to the length of the guns that the criminals, quote unquote, were using, and that the police could get longer guns, right? And the second thing that concerned me deeply when I heard his response was that of what I call a wait and see approach. Crime is something that is so serious that we have to have a very strategic approach. And it is something I've been saying for months and years now. Since 2022, when we saw some developments that concerned everybody. This administration promised, after the NNP had a national consultation on crime, promised the nation that they were going to have a national consultation bringing all stakeholders together. This has not to date materialized, and and as a result, I'm extremely, extremely concerned about that. I believe that that strategic approach that I spoke about needs to involve all key stakeholders, right? The police by themselves cannot solve all crimes. The police by themselves cannot be responsible for the safety and security of our citizens. They have an important role, but all sectors, the business community, the religious community, NGOs, everyone has a role to play. Hence the reason that you need to, and I remember the New National Party, I don't remember what year it was, but many years ago, under the leadership of Lieutenant Colonel Ogilvy, brought together all stakeholders, and you had a national strategic plan against crime. And this worked extremely well. I remember within that document, there were roles for every single person, whether you are a parent, whether you are a student, you are a teacher, a police officer, a business community, whatever sector of the society you represented, you knew from there what your role and your responsibility was. So starting there, we need to start from that backdrop. And I'm concerned that we are taking a very simplified approach to this very important issue where we talk about guns and the size of guns and the lengths of guns. You know, this is too trivial. We need to look at the issue of, after we've moved from the strategic process, the strategic platform, we need to now move into what are those strategic areas of intervention. And of course, that would be captured very well in a strategic plan. So if you look at border control, for example, this is critical. You go to, and I'm not going to name a community, but you go to several communities right here in St. Andrew, and residents would tell you about some night activities. Residents would tell you even about day activities, right, that are frightening. And so we know our borders are very porous, and we have to strategically come up with what are the ways in which we are going to address this particular issue. You look at the Coast Guard service, for example. In light of the situation, are we increasing patrols? Do we have the capacity? Are we providing the level of support for increased patrol? Only a couple of weeks ago, there was a report where the Coast Guard was to go out on a particular call, and they couldn't go because they did not have access to gas, readily access to gas. And so that would have affected their ability to respond or to take whatever necessary actions they need to take. So the strategic intervention is very critical, timely. I mean, we're losing time here, but we also have to look at the proactive approach. So you can have your reactive, but you also definitely need more of a proactive approach. So the programs for young men, the programs for youth at risk, the programs for parents, the programs for communities, right? And so the issue of, let's say, for example, community policing, where have we gone with this compared to many years ago? Are we moving ahead? Are we increasing? Are we improving? All of those questions would help us to answer the one question: are we really taking crime and violence in our society as serious as we ought to? What is the role of stakeholders at the community level? I remember, and speaking back then, churches were involved in education in the community. Churches were involved in response programs. So I am very concerned about the approach that is being taken. It's too simplified. We said that we see an increase in the importation of guns through our ports. I've heard that stated. And the question is, what have we done between then, when that concern was expressed, and now, almost 3 years after? What systems have we put at the port? Are there equipment that we could invest in to minimize the number of guns on the street? So I am very concerned, and I believe there's need for urgent action, particularly in the sectors that are most critical, at risk youth being one of those. And of course, as I said, the need for an urgent strategic plan, a national plan that people can access a copy to see what is their role, and people are educated on their role in the process. I believe we can have a safe community, a safe society, but it requires strategic intervention in that regard. Everybody cannot just be doing their own thing. It has to be well organized and structured.
I like how you punch on the word proactive. Is one of the things I encourage. Would you, as a normal course of part of your culture, part of your philosophy, part of your policy, encourage stakeholders to serve as think tank so that any suggestion that they have that will reduce crime in your country, that your government would welcome it, or your political party?
Of course, I believe the more people are involved in addressing a problem, the higher the possibility that that problem will be successfully addressed. So that is why I said the police by themselves cannot. We need to expand our community policing program. We need to expand the involvement of people in the work of the police, right? And so that think tank that you spoke about is extremely important. How do we, for example, in St. Andrew, where we both based, how do we, for example, bring the business community together, the police, the leadership of schools and other key stakeholders, how do we bring them together to brainstorm what else can be done? And I know of instances. So, for example, there are many initiatives that came out of processes like these. So, for example, the increase in patrol in the southern belt of this country, where we speak about tourism as a focus area. I know that there's been several in the past consultation with business community, the hoteliers and others, as to how can we reduce certain activities. And there's been measurable successes in that regard. And the same thing must be taken nationally. So whether you're in Guelph or you're in Certes or you're in St. Andrew, you're in St. David, wherever you are, St. Mark, Carriacou, it means that that approach must be the same thing across the board, engaging stakeholders, engaging people, engaging our children. And this is so critical because a child needs to understand the cost of crime, the impact of crime, not just on the society, but how they can be affected, right? And so, if we have children involved in the conversation, young adults involved, and the entire society, I believe we are going to see a better response and more results in that regard.
We have Master Carl with us here. Master Carl, you want to come in now with
Greetings, MP.
Good afternoon to you. Good
Um,
morning still.
I've
But
not seen you in a bit, but your delivery on the budget debate was one for the ages. Now I want to ask you something. Now there's a practice, or it is believed, or a perception that victimization is the hallmark and nepotism of this present administration. In so much as the Prime Minister boldly spoke in the convention that we don't know who is the people that were the other persons was scared. What would you do different in terms of that?
I've stated before, I'm stating now again, and I'll continue to state that I believe in a Grenada for all, right? Not special classes of people, not special people based on their political affiliation, right? Every political organization has a responsibility to take care of their supporters, every political organization, in whatever form or ways that you choose to do that. Every organization. So, whether you belong to the credit union, you belong to a club down the road, membership is critical. But when we speak about the state of Grenada, Carriacou, and PT Martinique, we definitely not speaking about a group of people who support a particular party. And that is why the language cannot be what has been expressed by the Prime Minister, right? There must be no them and us when we speak about state resources. There must be no them and us when we speak about people thriving and people having access to jobs and opportunities. This must be for Grenadians. It must be for everyone. It cannot be them and us. And I found it very irresponsible, very heartless, very cold of the Prime Minister to make some public statements like those. Even if he was thinking so, I'm worried that he has expressed those views and expressed them publicly. And to even feel that way as a Prime Minister concerns me very deeply.
Another thing I want to ask you about in terms of the Chinese housing, and I've seen in recent times this build back better and houses and so on being handed over to persons, and but the Chinese houses are still there. Based on information, nobody don't have them as yet. What would you do different in terms of housing and the Chinese housing together, based in the fact that after burial, because this government is blaming everything on burial. What's your take on this?
Well, my first take at this is that I pray to God that we don't have to wait for the NNP to return to office to distribute those houses. That's the first thing. I would be heartless as well if I say when we get into office, we are going to distribute them. I believe that these houses needs to be distributed immediately. This government in office attacked the New National Party administration, saying that we were taking too long to distribute the houses. Of course, we know that there was some internal work that were being finalized. So whether it's water, electricity, those minor things that you might not see visibly from on the outside. And in some cases, we actually started the process. So in Karaku, for example, people actually got letters, right? And they were assigned to particular houses, units, right? So the process started, the selection and distribution process started. There were some delays in terms, as I said, getting some final things in there. The administration attacked the NNP, the current administration, during the campaign to say that we were taking too long, that it was heartless of us not to quickly distribute these houses, those units, sorry. And it's almost unbelievable that almost 3 years after, you yourself have not taken the necessary actions to ensure that Grenadians in need of proper housing accessed and had available to them those units. So there are two things. One, you have the persons who are in need and cannot access. Those units are still closed and empty. And you have two, our concern based on what we've seen in terms of the numbers that the Housing Authority said that they've distributed. So distributed versus occupancy. We are we are very concerned as to what may be happening there. And we are going to be asking for a more detailed report because it appears that some of these units must have been distributed to people who don't need to occupy them currently. And that defeats the whole purpose of this program. Not only the heartlessness of this, it defeats the purpose of the program because it's supposed to be for people who are in need. Almost every day, I get calls from people who are asking and requesting support as it relates to housing. Now, how can we have a situation like this when we have those units who are that are closed up and people do not have access to them? Now, the second thing is as it relates to the Build Back Better houses. I mean, that one is it's a tragedy, right? You talk about people, over 90% of these people in Karaku either lost their homes totally or significantly damaged that they cannot occupy to date. This administration should really be embarrassed, should really be apologizing to the people of Karaku that after close to 1 year, we are heading towards a year, that many of these people are still in the same situation. You committed. We did not tell you to do 100 houses per month. We did not suggest that, right? The administration has not been able to meet not one commitment as it relates to housing, not one. So when you look at 2024, where they were committed to building hundreds of houses, not one house was delivered to a person in Karaku and Pitimatnik under this program, right? So we continue to call, and I'm happy that we've seen some aggressive action on the part of the government since the budget and the lead up to the budget, where we have been making serious appeals on behalf of the people of Karaku and Pitimatnik, which is why we won't stop, because we recognize that there are some things that you have to address in a very direct way to get a response from this administration. So we've seen some actions, as they say, some boots on the ground, very late, but better late than never. And we are challenging them to speed up, to double up, to take far more actions than they're currently taking to address the housing situation. The issue of labor, that has been raised as a major concern. But hey, if you identify the problem, then your responsibility is to now find solution. So if labor is a problem, do you just sit back and say we have a problem? Or do you take charge as leaders and find solutions to the problem? Because there are many solutions to a labor problem. Everywhere in the world, there is a solution to that problem. Where is our government's solution to that problem? And the solution to that problem is not to speak about TVET an introduction of TVET in primary school. That's not the solution in the immediate. So there are immediate solutions, medium-term solutions, and long-term solutions. And we expect that across the board, short, medium, and long-term, that the government would be responding accordingly, but aggressively to the housing situation. What would be our administration's response to this in the future? As I said, I'm minusing the current short term, immediate next week, next month. I'm not speaking to that. But I'm going to say that housing, quite obviously, is going to be a major area of focus for our administration in the future. And I'm speaking of this from a few perspectives. And let me just start with the issue of youth and housing. That has been a major area of concern in the past. Young people's ability to access proper housing and to access housing in the first place. And I'm not speaking here about every young person who just feels to leave home and go on their own. I'm talking about young people who are prepared and ready to start a life of their own, and they are committed to that. They are mature enough to do that, right? We have to, as a government, provide more support for young people in that particular area. The issue of quality of housing obviously is another area that we have to do far more in and far better in. I am not sure that our efforts in the past, which was well appreciated by thousands of people throughout the length and breadth of Grenada, as it relates to wooden homes and support to repair homes, our approach, as I said, highly rated over the years, even our response to Hurricane Ivan. But I think the time has come for us to relook some of the ways going forward that we respond to housing, not just in terms of quality, but cost effectiveness. So you would give somebody $30,000 worth of material or $15,000 worth of material in 2025. And then by 2026, 2027, they're back because their situation requires additional support. And the question is, in 2025, if you had done it slightly differently, maybe some parts of the house that needed to be in concrete, for example, blocks, for example, do we invest more there? Do we build the capacity of the housing authority to do more in that regard? We have to ensure that we are looking at all the systems that can be strengthened to improve on whatever we've done in the past to make it even better, far better. And I believe this is the mandate, even from our former prime minister and political leader. He said, Emmalin, whatever we've done before, we need to ensure that we build upon that and we do it even better going forward.
I want to touch on on a topical issue.
Mhm.
MP. Now, NNP received a lot of leaks from the opposition at the time on the CBI, and a lot of accusation on corruption was thing. Then the National Democratic Congress assumed political office and they boast of how much passports being sold, how much money is, and they quote in a lot of high figures. But we wake up recently to understand an integral part of somebody who was the face of their CBI is now being investigated in unlikely terms. Now, what would your organization do, or if would you do anything different should you return to office with the CBI?
Well, I can't speak to the case you're referring to. I don't have the details of that. But what I can say as it relates to, well, first of all, some of the comments made by the current administration back in when they were in opposition, it speaks a lot to the hypocrisy and the dishonesty of the administration. Saying one thing in opposition, doing something totally different in government. The same is quite similar with regards to oil and gas. You listen the comments in opposition, you listen what they say in government, and it's just a trend really on so many different issues, not just oil and gas, not just CBI. So you say CBI is not something we should encourage. We're selling our birthright. This administration is crazy to be selling passports. And then you come and you sell more in, what are we, almost 3 years than we would have sold in the lifetime of the program. you've made that program your spine, as I refer to it, your backbone. You can't survive without it, right? And that brings me to the what would we do differently with CBI. Now, quite obviously, we just have to turn on the news and to understand the volatility of this program, to understand the fact that this is something you cannot go to sleep and believe that, it's just going to blossom into the best revenue generation source that you will ever have, right? Now, sustainability then becomes the issue, right?
Mm-hmm.
So, how do we protect the program? And protection, one of the areas that I'm also expressing concern about is the due diligence process,
Definitely.
maintaining the levels of due diligence in that program, the issue of conflict of interest, who's marketing, who's selling, what's the relationship with those who approving. There's just so many issues there that are of concern when we speak about the program in general. But I believe the issue of sustainability is something we cannot. I went to a meeting with the ECCB just this week, and in preparation for the meeting, I looked at their document, and one of the first statements that popped out to me was the fact, and I'm trying to remember the exact wording now, but basically saying that the sustainability of the program depends on us, right? And it was my beginning response to the presentation, the actual presentation, that I have serious difficulties with that statement, because you turn on the news, you listen to the President of America, for example, and you know that any morning we wake up, we can have a situation where we cannot make this statement.
The
And
European Union also.
just this week we saw what
Yeah.
came out of there and the process as it relates to visa-free access and so on. And so the program is one that we have to always be conscious that we cannot totally absolutely rely on CBI. So minus CBI revenues from this budget that was just presented, and you would see the risky position that we're in, minus loans, minus CBI. And that brings me to the long-term conversation as it relates to our economy. Where are we heading? Sustainability, being able to generate revenue through more sustainable sectors and means. So, for example, how do we, and we always have that conversation, we talk about it a lot, but how do we really seriously have a conversation on reducing our food imports? How do we grow more locally? How do we feed ourselves more? How do we find income generating initiatives that are more sustainable, that we can be more dependent on than a program that can fluctuate anytime? So the Russians come, the Russians go. So even at the session, when they presented the numbers, revenue generation figures for the last few years, then I asked them, and you see the arrow going up, the graph going up. And then I ask, do we have figures that show us what the graph would look like if we remove the sale to Russian passports to Russians, right? Because we know that we had a serious spike in that period there recently, because the government was doing the backlogs of Russian applications. So if we minus that, what is the true performance? What would that be over the next few years? Can we depend on it in the current international environment, that global environment that we exist in, that we have no choice, that we are part of, that can impact the progress of this project, this initiative, and the success of this initiative? Where do we stand on that? And so we are consistent, whether in opposition or in government. That is why when we sat in the session with the ECCB on CBI, we did not change our mouths on CBI. We believe that the CBI the program is a serious source of revenue, a source of revenue that I believe needs to focus more on capital initiatives than on recurrent initiative. And this administration needs to ensure that revenue from CBI is used more for programs that have long-term long-term benefits to the society as opposed to just recurrent expenses. So we are going to ensure that we continue to put systems in place to strengthen the program, one, but to ensure that we are not absolutely totally dependent on that program alone.
You raise a important point, due diligence. And based on the boast, as you say, or the recent upsurge in the amount of passports and the areas, I believe due diligence is a bit difficult in those areas. So I think that's one of the things we ought to look at in terms of that. And
That
as
is why,
me
if I
out,
should interject, that is
yeah,
why I said we ought not to be so desperate for the resources generated there. Because if you become too reliant on it, there's going to be a level of desperation when it comes to meeting your recurrent expenses. So you're going to be rushing the process to increase the income. And that is dangerous. You want to make sure that you are not so reliant to the extent that you are desperate. That's my concern, because the due diligence process sometimes could take time. There are certain jurisdictions, there are certain areas, certain countries where accessing information could become very problematic. And many of those areas where you have high levels of application, do we rush because we need the cash now? Or do we take our time and make sure that we are doing the right thing?
MP, I want to just go back to your budget presentation a bit. When you spoke to a deficit budget, and then the government in their discussion try to say they have savings and surplus. Could you just speak to that a bit?
Mhm. So I used a very simple analogy to kind of help the average person who probably doesn't care much about the budget conversation, that they could identify and they can understand. It's not a perfect example, but I view the conversation then as one in which a person, let's say you fell from the step, and on first examination, somebody said, okay, it's just a sprain, as old people would say, take a corn and rub it, lift it up, put it up on a chair. And then you go tomorrow and you do an x-ray and realize it's broken, right? And I can speak to a case of this that happened only very recently. So the surplus that was referred to, current account surplus, that only tells us part of the picture without seeing the entire picture. This is only part. It tells us what it looks like when it comes to our current revenue and our current expenditure. So, how much are we getting from the port and from customs and so on? And how are we doing with payment of salaries and so on and so forth? And it's a good thing to have a current account surplus. It's a good thing. I'm not going to say it's a bad thing. I mean, no surplus should be seen as negative, right? So it's a good thing. But the question and the emphasis that I made and referenced was, does the story end there? What is the full story? And the full story is when you go one step further, you're going to realize that you have a deficit of what, $337 million, because you've broadened the picture now to look at capital projects. You've broadened the picture to look at other things besides just like in your home, paying the electricity, paying the water, those basic things. You got to go beyond that if you're very serious. And beyond that would also include the issue of loans, because if you take a loan, you have to repay it, and there's interest associated with that. So even when we speak about the $337 million in deficits, hello, it does not include loans, principal and interest. So this government is trivializing the deficit for another optic moment of PR, because obviously they believe that the average person would love to hear the word surplus, right? So it's all about PR. Let's celebrate the surplus. We don't care about the deficit. Well, at some point, you're going to care about the deficit because the full picture would be staring you in the face. because you would have to find the monies to do the capital project, except you plan not to do any. You would have to find the monies to pay for the loans you've taken, to repay the loans. And that is why I don't know if sometimes people think everyone lack common sense, right? But when you say we can fully cover the budget, that's what the government said. We don't have to worry, the monies are there, we can take care of the budget. Then
Why loan? Why the loan?
I would ask two dumb questions. The one that you ask, why alone? And I'll add another dumb question to it. Why that amount, $825 million? Why
Unprecedented.
50 million? Why was it 20 million? Because you don't need it. You're just doing it just for casualties. Why didn't you just do 25 million or 50 million or 100 million, even 200 million? Why 825? Now, I'll tell you this. If you take the deficit, the overall deficit, and you add to that the loan payments, right, which are going to land you about $400 million there. So if you add that to the 337, now you're getting closer and closer to that
825.
25. So you begin to understand that somebody,
Yes.
some group of people sat somewhere. We are not so dumb and stupid as we
Down
made.
in a lab and plan that.
Somebody sat down and they decided, okay, hey, this is what it is. We would need $825 million to be able to cover this. And guess what? They came from that lab, as you describe it, and they went to a press conference. And they told us that they need that amount to cover the cost of the budget. But I guess they went back to the lab based on the reaction of the public.
Mm-hmm.
This government is very responsive in some ways. So they went back to the lab and said, no, you should not have said that. And I know what I'm saying, right? You should not have said that. We can't say that. This is not good PR. So, hey, guess what? We need to come up with a strategy that gives the impression that we don't have a financial problem. We're covering this thing. It's well under control. Let's move on to the next question.
Yes, I need to ask that because now, as you see, this present administration shining objects, shining mirrors. Over 8 million was removed from the I-money budget. I know that's your baby. And we're hearing now the boast that we pay and grade to police of 6 million. I want you to expose this thing. Because you see, a lot of people don't understand what this government doing is like, what you call Robin Hood. So there was a Robin Hood moment. Rob from the Imanis and say we give the police something. What's your take on that?
Well, we see that throughout the budget, the cuts in critical sectors, productive sectors, agriculture, important social sectors like health, for example. How do you cut budget in those areas? It's frightening where we are heading. And it's a situation where the situation is not the same as it was 2-3 years ago, where the situation worsens. And this was complex about this situation, In a worsening situation, you're investing less. In a worsening situation, you're investing less. Help me understand this. But you're absolutely right. Is the trickery involved in so many ways? Let's use youth as an example. So we're not even getting yet to the pay and grade. Right within the youth program, you cut one program by $8 million. And then you add 2 new programs, but the total cost of the 2 new programs is $3 million. So tell me somebody is not trying to be smart, right? You cut 8, you take away 8, and you add back 3 of the 8, and you clap and you pound the table and you say, great job, we moving forward, right? Transformation, right? Several areas. So you cut from the farmers, you cut from healthcare at a time when the government themselves admitted that healthcare is worse today than it was in 2022. So in a time like this, you take out from healthcare, you take out from agriculture, where farmers are trying to get back on their feet in agriculture, poultry complaining, every aspect, the price of pork, the price of poultry, the price of fish is going up. Farmers are saying to you, yes, we got a little change, but guess what? I needed to fix my house too. I needed to
Mm.
feed my family. This was Christmas. And, I need some real support. In a time like this, you're cutting investment in agriculture. So while, yes, I totally, absolutely support pay and grade, we've supported this, we've spoken about it, and we support. In a time like this, when you are doing something like that, we say, yes, very well, continue, roll it out quickly, ensure that you cater for not just those who are there, but those who probably just left, right? Make sure that when you speak retroactive, you cover in some of the people who just left as well. Do it right. No problem. But you should not be doing it at the expense of others. And here is why. If you inherited a pregnant treasury of over $500 million, if you say revenues from CBI was over $1 billion,
Billion.
if you would have received over $118 million from the CRIF program, so you did not have to put out that,
No.
it means that your fiscal financial situation should be such that you should be able to maintain your contribution to these important sectors. So you should be increasing for health, you should be increasing agriculture, you should be increasing tourism, right? At the same time, you should be in a position to be able to cover the pay and grade. And maybe there's a difficulty in doing that, because if you look at the pattern and the behavior, as I say, look at the pattern, look at the posture, look at the behavior of this administration. There's a level of mismanagement and wasteful spending that makes it difficult to now do the pay and grade, plus an increase in health, plus an increase in agriculture. It is their posture, it is their behavior that is going to make this difficult. That is why we are saying, put your house in order and prioritize. So, do you have to travel so regularly?
We're going
Or
to take some reaction before you dare touch travel.
Mhm.
Before you dare touch travel, sister, we're going to take some reaction from social media.
Okay.
Somebody is asking to ask if it is fair to say that this government had bankrupt Grenada by the time Beryl had hit and they were in a desperate financial position.
And I'll give my private personal opinion on this. My personal private opinion on this is that this government, this government must be very thankful that they would have received the payout from the CRIF program at the time that they did. I would never say they must be thankful for burial because of the destruction that it brought. But I'm saying this, and I feel convinced about this, that the payout that this administration received from burial would have kept them afloat. I believe that. It is the reason why this administration was very reluctant to give a ball by ball coverage of the spending of the CRIF funds. I remember us asking a breakdown, and guess what? They themselves at that time said that all the monies just went into one place and we won't be able to give a breakdown of it or what it was spent on. I can guarantee you, minus those resources at that time, there are some critical things. And I'm not going to go into specifying and say salaries, for example, but I know for a fact that there are some critical things that this administration would not have been able to do had it not been for the CRIF payout. And those things had nothing to do with farmers. It probably is the reason why this was so delayed. Why is it that farmers had to wait so long? Why is it that fishermen had to wait so long? As a matter of fact, some of them still waiting. Why is it that efforts in rebuilding homes, go back and remember what they said to us. They said to us that we are delaying the process of rebuilding homes because we want to build back better. They said that they were not going to be distributing materials all over the place like this because we want to build back better. I believe and I'm convinced that it was not about that, about building back better, because you came and you did the same. People have materials under the house, they can't make a squat yet. They cannot move an inch since they got it. And now, one, it might not be enough to make a dent. So, for example, can it cover the roof properly? Can it do all that they need to do? And so, this is why they said they were not doing it, because they didn't want to do a half job. They wanted to do this thing properly. Now, the question is, could it have been that the resources were used otherwise and they had to wait to get resources to do what the CRIF payout was supposed to do? And again, it brings me back to the point I made earlier. I have serious concern about the approach, the
And how you have concern,
attitude.
how you have concern is so time flies sometime.
Let me,
I want to ask you about,
I need to ask her one question. Okay?
go ahead.
Now, in your deliberation and other members of the opposition spoke to the cost of living, and the government in their own way laugh and jeer and think it was a joke. But lo and behold, in justifying the procurement, they use the cost of living. What's your take on that?
So I'll just say this, that there's only one place cost of living has been going up, 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 right? It is a serious concern for us because we see every single day the plight of the single mothers, the plight of even businessmen, and the response they're getting in terms of sales, what is happening in terms of the economy. We see how people are affected by increases in critical areas, utilities, for example, food, medication. For us, this is one of our biggest areas of concern, that people are not able to put basic food on the table. The government seems not to be very concerned about this, unfortunately. And why do I say this? I justify my statement by saying, when you look at the response in the budget, the response to cost of living, it's absolutely almost nothing new. And it does not speak to making any dent in addressing the issue. We were expecting, and their approach and on excuses is so, we were expecting that this administration would have come with a package that would bring relief, immediate relief to families around the nation, mothers and fathers, children. We were expecting something of significance. So, you know, from your CPI results, you know that there's been a significant increase in the cost of medication. So, we expected the package to say something about basic medication, high blood pressure, blood sugar, basic medication, basic heart, things that people use regularly every day, the average person with medical issues, right? We expected to see something there. The basket of goods, go look at the basket of goods and tell
Definitely.
me if shopping is going to be easier for anybody. So we expected to see reflected in the basket of goods some items that would have bring some more relief. I
Zero.
was surprised. I'm sitting there and I'm listening to hear the new list of items. And you know, when the minister, I don't know if he said it for reactions, and he spoke about panty liners and those things. I mean, I'm saying to myself, when would you come with a list of
Instructions.
things that would really have a positive effect on people? And so we expect that this administration at some point very soon would review the basket of goods, the VAT exempted items, and they would bring a new basket, a bigger basket, a new basket that would really make a difference for people. So stop playing games, and you know, everything is the last administration. As I said, that's like the road match. The last administration, 23 years. Come on, you there almost 3 years. Sing your own song, get a new song, do something that would create your own road match. You know, it's time. And I'm really serious about this. We are babying this administration too much. And I believe a lot of us are responsible for the poor performance of this administration. A lot of us are responsible for the mismanagement that we're seeing, reckless spending in areas that are not priority. How are we responsible? We are responsible because we are defending certain actions that they feel it's okay to continue. So the prime minister is traveling and he goes with a whole string band of people behind him.
You see, every time you go on to the prime minister traveling, I want to pull you back. I want to pull you back from that now. I want to ask you, what is your reaction? What would you say to men and women who have qualms about a woman leading Grenada? Because obviously, we believe by the next election you would be the prime minister. What would you say to them?
I absolutely believe that too. But let me just say this, and I don't spend a lot of time on this gender issue of leadership because leadership, as far as I'm aware, my master's is in leadership, right? Specialized in leadership. Business administration specialized in it. I've read nowhere, I've studied nowhere where there is a theory that is overwhelmingly proving that leadership is based on gender, right? Now, leadership, if you ask what are the key elements of quality leadership, what are the key elements of good leadership, great leadership, effective leadership, we just have to think and to be fair and to be honest. You're talking about integrity, you're talking about humility, you're talking about people's effectiveness, efficiency. What are you bringing to the table? What change can you make? How do you actually effectively lead? Now, that has nothing to do with a person's gender if we are really serious about leadership, right? So it is about those things character wise, it is about those things that are skilled wise that when you put together, you get effective leadership. And that is why so many men believe in women's leadership. So if you look at leadership in the broadest context, you look at, I often say this, if a man feels very strongly, very, very strongly about women's leadership, then that man may not have understood the role of his own mother in most instances, right? So the point is, leadership is not just about that level. You go right back to the home, the role of women in leadership in the homes, right? In the community, in the church. And if you look at it today, you would notice the gap is widening there, right? And I have a strong view about equality and equity when it comes to gender. So for me, I believe whether you're a man or a woman, you have what it takes. You must be qualified for an equal space at the table. It must never be reduced. Leadership must never be reduced to a gender conversation. It is your skills, your competence, your ability, your integrity, and all the other things, competencies that makes good leadership. Your humility, your love for people. Those are the things that matters when we speak about leadership, not if you're male or you're female. That's reducing the conversation, in my opinion. Let's get a good leader, a person that cares about people, a person who can make a difference, a person who genuinely love people and want to make things better at the national level for people. Whether you're male, you're female, you're a child. As a matter of fact, I feel strongly that a woman is best placed when it comes to taking care of men, taking care of women, taking care of children.
This one is a very powerful one that you have to make quite more often, because it's easy to believe that, but we must also impart that to the younger people and to the people who may question it. My sister, pro-life and pro-choice. You could never get away from me if I don't ask this question, particularly in light of what is going on in the world now. Pro-life and pro-choice. Give me a position on it.
Without thinking, I believe in pro life. I believe the sanctity of life must be protected. I believe every life is valuable. Doesn't matter if you're rich or you're poor, it doesn't matter if you're of religion A or B, it really doesn't matter. And if we're speaking about the unborn, I maintain the same view as it relates to life. I am pro-life.
Well, I wouldn't ask you about euthanasia because definitely you would be against that too. You know. So we go into foreign affairs. You can speak to me if I don't ask you about foreign affairs. We have some people in the Caribbean that claim them is left. We have some people in the Caribbean that claim them is Marxist Leninists. As soon as the revolution done, they jump and they gone to America. So in terms of Grenada and the your foreign affairs policy that you would have, would you continue in the trend of the political party that you existed in? Would you strengthen it? What is your position on it? And you could deal with your attitude to CARICOM one time.
So let me just get CARICOM out of the way. I believe in regional institutions, and not just believe in them, I have a stronger belief that they ought to work for us. So we must not just build institutions and have them exist and glorify them. They have to make a difference. And I think far greater efforts need to be placed in making these regional institutions work for us. So if we come together and we say we are CARICOM, so you have a CARICOM secretariat, that must function in a way that it facilitates the objectives that we set. What is it we really want to do? But then beyond the organization or the institution that has been set up to facilitate, we ourselves must be united in our efforts, and we must stick to those things that we commit to do. So you cannot have country A signing an agreement today to say, I support X or Y or Z without being specific. So whether specific could be free movement of labor or whatever it is, you can't meet today, agree that you're going to do X or Y or Z, and then tomorrow you behave in a totally different way to what you would have agreed to. So we have to be consistent. We have to be willing to work together. We agree on the things we agree upon, and we move to implement. There are too many issues that we've agreed upon, whether it's OECS or CARICOM, that for too long we've been dragging on implementing those. I don't know if we bite in too much, then we can chew. Whatever the problem is, we need to address making these institutions work for us. They must not just be things that we refer to in name. They must be making a very visible difference, whether in the area of trade, whether in the area of security, whatever the area. CARICOM, OECS, they got to work for us, and we have to make them work. So that's my position on that. The second position, as you know, our organization is, you can describe as right of center, center right. And so there are some fundamental beliefs, there are some fundamental views that we have as an organization. And I feel very comfortable as leader of our party, in terms of those things we believe in, those things that we view as critical. However, we do understand that we exist in a global environment. And so we believe very strongly that that should not limit us from engaging with different countries, different organizations. I don't have to believe what you believe in to have a conversation with you. I don't have to believe in what you believe in to work together on border security, for example. So it means that our relationship with organizations, institutions, different countries must have definitions. There must be things that define the relationship we have, right? So, for example, your relationship with your husband is quite different to your relationship with the shopkeeper, right? So you don't go to bed with your shopkeeper, you go there to buy goods and to get a service. So it's the same way we must operate as a country. And so there might be extreme situations that we may want to disassociate with for different reasons, whether it's collectively or otherwise. But as a general principle, we believe that our relationships must be carefully defined. We stand for something, we don't fall for any and everything. And we don't subscribe to the view that because you are helping us, because you're giving us something, that we have to subscribe to your belief and we have to sign on to your belief. We can tell you definitely, thank you for your support, but we maintain our policy and our view and our belief in this particular subject. You got to respect our position as a country. We can't be an open sepulcher where we believe and agree on everything dependent on who's giving us what. We must stand for something as a nation. And as a political organization, that's exactly how we feel too.
Would you advocate? Well, I had to ask you this one, John Galt insists that I do. Would you advocate the strengthening of the health clinics in St. Patrick's, St. John's, St. David's, where most service are made available to our people? More health service.
There are two things I believe in very, very, very strongly as it relates to healthcare. I believe in primary healthcare significantly so, and we have to find an approach where primary healthcare is strengthened. And I believe, as long as I have the opportunity to lead this organization, that that's one of the things I would push very strongly. So our health clinic in Tivoli, for example, in Crowshoe, in Birch Grove, wherever they are, in Granborough, our health clinic in Guave, in St. Mark's, wherever, our health clinics at the local level must be sufficiently staffed and must have the basic equipment to do things that we don't necessarily have to go to the general hospital for. I believe people have lost confidence in our primary healthcare systems for very, very basic reasons. If I go there and there's no basic medication, I cannot dress a simple cut, then who's going to go there to have a baby? You see, if I can't get a cut dressed, will I go there to have a baby? So we want to
midwife.
we got to boost the confidence in people. So we complain that everybody's going to the general hospital. Well, yes, they will if they don't have confidence in our primary healthcare system. And so significant resources. Before we start speaking about a new hospital, let us fix that. Let us make sure that a mother can proudly walk into the health center in Guave or in St. Patrick and want to deliver her baby there. Or you get a broken arm and you feel comfortable going in your district medical center, for example. So I believe very much staffing, equipment, and the basic supplies, critical, primary health care. And the other thing that I believe very strongly in besides primary healthcare services is that of preventative health care. So we got to be teaching people, emphasis, where is the budget for this? We got to be teaching people how to take care of themselves, but not just teaching and educating them, providing the enabling conditions, the environment. So I remember going to Cuba, and it's something I feel strongly about as well. Going to Cuba, and I was astonished. Religiously, the elder citizens came out in the parks, in the yards, wherever, because every morning, 5 a.m., between 5 and 6, whatever the time, they are there with an instructor doing physical activities. Look at the seniors and how long they live and the quality of life they live. We got to make sure that we are doing preventative. So how do we provide incentives for people who eat local, people who promote local, people who are doing things that at the community level, for example, chess football club, the programs that are encouraging fitness and health, what kind of support systems are we going to put in place for them? Because we might overlook that as important, right? But Andal, I'm just using that's the first one that came to my mind. There are many others, forgive me, right? But if you look at Andal's Football Academy, for example, one might just see this as his own personal little thing. But I believe going forward, we have to place more emphasis on these programs because ask about child obesity in Grenada. And then you begin to value more initiatives like these at the community level. So when we speak preventative, it doesn't necessarily mean that the government has to go start this here and start that here, but find what exists, strengthen them, expand them, develop them, and create an atmosphere in the country. I remember when we used to say, tourism is everybody's business, right? It was a campaign. and we encouraged and we promoted and we said why. Children had an opportunity to go to experience the hotel. I remember a program when I was a teacher where teachers were given a weekend in a hotel to experience tourism firsthand, so that when you teach, you're able to teach from your experience. And so I'm saying all of that to say similar approaches need to be taken to health. We need to create some kind of awareness that goes beyond just knowledge, and people are moved and people are excited to make a difference, to get up and
Let's-
walk.
And Madam Parliamentary Representative, as time flies, I am very glad that you mentioned Andal Football Club organization, because sometimes I believe this initiative started by individuals is worthy of mention.
Yeah.
But in the same vein, what do you make of the language, the utterances, and expressions of this NDC leadership? Classless, commoners, beggy, lunatic, and idiot. What do you make of this language?
Mother hen.
Mother hen. What do you make of this kind of language from the leadership of a political party 50 years after independence?
And I'm asking myself the question, and there's just one thing that keeps floating in my mind as a response. You know, the way a person describes others tells a lot about the individual. The way a person treats others tells a lot about the individual. And that's how I
We're
choose.
going to take that last call. Sorry to stop you, but we're taking that call.
Yeah. Mhm.
Yes, caller, welcome.
Yes, good afternoon to you, sir.
And you're calling the end that time, eh? Watch.
Thank you very much. Good afternoon to the goodly lady. I'll tell you something. I listened to this program there, and hands up to this lady abilities. All the things that she's saying there, zero back to one thing, the economy. Once you grow the economy to the extent where the economy could deliver finance, money, right? You have to monetize the economy. Then all this stock will just go by the wayside. There's an urgency to grow the economy, sitting with the private sector, the trade union, the banks, and work out a program where we'll have the kind of expansion that we need, because we have to create the money. If we're not creating the revenue, all this stock is just going by the wayside. Yeah? I want to just say to the good lady, focus on, I wanted to put some emphasis on crochet. If she gets back there, crochet cabinet. I would like to see this place develop into a mini town, yeah, where we can put the people of the area to work, so we can raise revenue, right?
Okay.
Have a great day, sir.
Thank you, caller. Yes, madam, you could continue, and I will give you the rest of your time with us to say something to your party or anything you want to say, because I know your time running out.
Right. So I'll just respond to the caller to say that I agree. There's an urgency for stimulating the economy, for growing the economy. There's an urgency to ensure that we put people back to work, ensure that people have monies in their pockets. You know, as I said that, I remember actually a joke. A young man I met in Grenville from Mackey, and every time I see him, it's like a running joke that we have, because he was holding his side, you know, and he appeared that like he was in pain. I met him in the middle of Grenville, and he said, you know, Miss Pierre, hurting me. And I literally, I mean, the type of person that I moved immediately, because I actually thought something was wrong with him. Well, and he started laughing when I tried to look at what was happening, where he was pointing to and where he was touching. And he said, oh gosh, no, my pocket. He said, I can't wait for an MP to come back. You know, so there is something missing, absolutely. There is something missing, absolutely. And it's the reason why people I interact with, especially businessmen, some of them would say, I'm not an NNP. I don't subscribe to the views of NNP, etc. But I believe in NNP for running Grenada. And they would say blatantly, just block it out like that. I would support NNP not because I love NNP, but because I care about my business, right? And it's the blatant truth for many people because they can tell you what the situation is now. You walk through Grenville and just listen, walk through Guelph, walk through anywhere and just ask someone, what has been your business experience between 2022 and now? And I guarantee you the response would be more or less the same throughout Grenada, Carriacou, and Petit Martinique. Now, in closing, I want to say this. I thank you, first of all, for this opportunity. And I admired the way that you blended the local political situation with policies and, serious things that probably are not the everyday conversation. And so that's important because people want to also know other things besides just what's happening between NNP and NDC and, the governance of the country, but broader subject matters. And so I appreciate that. As it relates to our party, a lot of work is happening right now. And I want to put it this way, internal and external. And I would describe external as the things that you would see. So you would see we have a public meeting. You would see we had a very successful social activity, fundraising activity yesterday. You will see those things. We were in St. David's, for example, going house to house. Last week Sunday we were in St. Patrick a couple weeks ago, right? Saying those are things people would see, you observe. But there are internal things that are also happening that are extremely important for preparation for the next general elections. Of course, some of those things I would not speak to publicly, but just to say that a lot of work is taking place internally and externally in terms of visibility. And I am very confident that our team understands the need to get ready for the next election and that we are all working in preparation for the next general election. I am very encouraged, very, very absolutely encouraged by the number of persons who are coming forward wanting to make a contribution. And what impresses me, what touches me most, is that many of these people are not persons you can point to and say they've been involved in politics. So, for example, you may find somebody who you know in the community as an educator, very known, very experienced, very respected within the community, but you could not have pointed this person and say, this person is an NP or NDC. And I see people like that coming forward to say, look, I want to be part of the change that we want to see in Grenada. How can I make a contribution? How can I be part of this? And so to all of our supporters out there, I close by saying to you, continue to work with your party. If you've ever worked before, let this be the hardest that you work, because I believe the greater that we contribute to this process, the bigger the success that we are going to achieve as a party. To those who don't support NNP, you've never been an NNP, you never thought of becoming an NNP, you have maybe an issue or two with the NNP. I just want to say this, that for us, we believe that the future of this country is going to be as bright as the people who come on board and get involved in the way forward as we walk towards a better, brighter Grenada. Meaning that even if you don't support our party, I believe that there's a room, there's a space, there's a contribution that you can make for Grenada's sake. And we appreciate and we welcome your contribution, whatever that is. There are persons who would have sent me comments leading up to the preparation of the budget. These are not people that I know to be NNP, but they care about Grenada. They're very concerned about what's happening and they want to see change. And so I'm saying this to say, if we can focus less, and that's our party's position. So our party, we are not involved in the us and them conversation. That's the government, right? They want everybody to be in NDC. They seem to want a one-party state. We respect people's political affiliation and their right to choose a party. But I'm saying to every single person who is leading me, who is listening to me, you don't have to join NNP to be a part of NNP's contribution to national development. You don't have to join NNP. Wherever you are, wherever you sit, you can work with us to build a brighter, better future for you your grandchildren, your children, and for all the generations that are going to come after us. I believe we owe that to them. We have a responsibility. And with the current trajectory of where we see this administration heading, their policies, their programs, their response, their posture, I cannot have confidence in their continued leadership. And that is why we are providing an alternative. That is why we are here to work together to be the alternative to what is currently leading and what is currently leading this country.
We want to thank you, Sister, this morning for being on the program, and we want to again invite you to pop in anytime, or you can call us anytime you have something major if you want to occupy one of the session, and we welcome you to the program.
Thank you again. Thank you, Carl. Thank you for this opportunity. And I really do appreciate it. And congratulations on your efforts. I never saw you as opening your own studio. I know for a fact you like to express your opinion and your views, and I know that. But I didn't see it coming that you would go that far. And I want to commend you and to say that you should not trivialize the difference that you can make in building a better community. And that's what I'm saying. Every individual has a role to play, and you've created your own platform and your own opportunity. Kudos to you. And let's use that opportunity to ensure that Grenada is a better place.
Yes, my sister, thank you. Yes, and we want to again thank those who participate on our program today, and we want to encourage you to share our program. It's very important for you to give us a blight. We are the new kids on the block. Share the program, subscribe to our program, like our program. Remember, we provoke discussion, and we would entertain anyone, even those who do not agree with us. If Deacon call tomorrow and he say he want to be on the program, he will be welcome. We will entertain him, and we will treat him in the same format with gracious respect.